Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call the meeting to order. We'll take a roll call, please.
Here.
Member Covert, Member Desart,
Here.
Member DeCiani,
Here.
Member Eckhoff, Member Elliott,
Here.
Member Healy, Member Krajewski,
He advised he's had car trouble this morning. He's going to try to get in here when he can, but his car failed him. So,
okay. Member Larson, Member Noonan, Member Ozak,
Here. Sorry.
Member Pachowski, Member Renahan,
Here.
Rutledge, here. Member Selman,
Here.
Tornatori, and Member Zay.
okay, we do have a quorum. We do not have a physical quorum here in the building once again, so we will have to be doing votes by roll call, although we can combine and approve in appropriate places. With that public comment, or do we need to take a vote here to allow people to participate? No, only the full county board. Gotcha. Okay, we do not have anyone signed up for public comment. So under chairman's remarks, just briefly, we continue our process today. This is one of our last presentations from the coroner's office on the finance budget before we get into the main budgets that will be received later this month. And then we'll have a meeting to discuss that in greater detail. So we can look forward to that. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of Tuesday, August 25, 2020. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion, corrections, deletions? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we need roll call.
Okay. Member Zay. Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert. Member Desart.
You're
Member
muted, Dawn.
Aye.
Member DeCiani,
Aye.
Eckhoff, Member Elliott,
Aye.
Member Hart, Member Healy, Member Krajewski, Member Larson,
Aye.
Member Noonan, Member Ozog,
Aye.
Member Pachowski, Member Renahan,
Aye.
Member Rutledge, Member Selman,
Aye.
Member Tornatori.
Okay, all ayes, those are approved. We move on to budget transfers.
Chairman, I move on FIR FAR 9420 budget transfers.
Second. Chaplin.
That was just a phone. I'm sorry. All right, so we have a motion and a second on budget transfers. Any discussion, corrections, deletions as to those? Seeing and hearing none, roll call.
Member Zay,
Aye.
Member Chaplin,
Aye.
Covert, Member Desart,
Aye.
Member DeCiani,
Aye.
Member Eckhoff, Member Elliott,
Aye.
Member Hart, Member Healy, Member Krajewski, Member Larson,
Aye.
Member Noonan, Member Ozog,
Aye.
Member Pachowski, Member Renahan,
Aye.
Member Rutledge, Member Selman,
Aye.
Member Tornatori.
Okay, all ayes, those are approved. Under procurement requisitions, finance.
Mr. Chairman, I move on FIP 23420 approval of contract issued to the Sotos Law Firm for legal defense of the county and sheriff's deputies, one-time period, in the amount of $150,000.
We have a motion and a second. Member Desart has discussion.
Thank you. I have two questions on this whole agenda that I normally would have asked Nick Kottmeyer, but because of the holiday, I didn't want to bother him. So my question on this particular item is, would it be less expensive for us as a county to hire a lawyer in-house than to hire this law firm?
Well, ordinarily, most of our legal defense matters are handled by the state's attorney's office when there is a conflict in the ability of the state's attorney's office to do that, or there's very specialized area of the law that we can't normally afford to hire somebody full-time to do a very specialized area of the law. That would be when we bring in a contractor. But Nick, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. We had it the first time.
I had it. Okay. No, you actually were exactly correct. All of our legal outside help is directed and administered by the State's Attorney's Office. The first line of attack would be that they cover all of the needs. If they can't for some reason, or there's a conflict, then they recommend the hiring of a third party. So that is at the direction of the State's Attorney's Office. So you're absolutely correct.
Thanks, Nick.
Further questions, discussions on this issue? Oh, Member Rozak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we get a little bit of historical background on this? Is 150,000 generally the amount that is spent on outside counsel, say for the last couple of years? Or is it just too hard to guesstimate how much you would spend, or what has been the history of this?
I'm going to let Connor McCarthy speak to this issue.
Right. Okay. So this is brought in for a particular case. It was recently served. 150,000 is, depending on how long the case goes, could be enough. It could be, or it might not be enough. We may have to come back for a change order. It depends. Litigation is unique, in each case is unique. So the needs and requirements may take more time or less time. But when we use outside counsel, we only use them in cases of conflict or where there's a particular expertise. So I would say I can't really give you a guarantee that 150,000 is going to be enough. It might take more, it might take less. It depends how the litigation progresses.
And what's our?
And one other question, is that how you usually do this, on literally a case-by-case basis, depending on what the contention is? Is that?
Yes, the state's attorney is the statutory attorney for the board and the county and all the county departments. So we handle as much in-house as we can. Where there's a conflict or there's some reason that we can't represent everyone, we have to bring in outside counsel for ethical reasons and also for practical reasons. And if, the same way, if there's a particular specialized expertise that maybe we wouldn't have in-house, that would be something where we would go and make sure we have someone that has the same appropriate legal duty to the board of competence and familiarity with that area of the law. This is one of the former situations, not one of the latter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the board on this issue? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Zay.
Aye.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Covert. Member Dessart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozag.
Aye.
Member Puchalski. Member Renahan.
Aye.
Member Rutledge. Aye. Member Selman.
Aye.
Member Tornatori.
Okay, all ayes, that is approved. On to judicial and public safety. I don't see Chairman Eckhoff on the line. Oh, no, there you are. Lord. I only saw him in the parking lot.
I know I'm short, but geez. All right.
It's early after a long weekend.
Somebody get him coffee. All right, I move approval of JPS 484-20, acceptance and appropriation of the DCFS Children's Advocacy Center.
Do we have a motion? Do we have we had a second from Member Elliott. I see Member Dessart. Discussion.
Thank you. I just wanted to caution staff that this is the second time our addresses, the board's addresses, have been published in a public packet. This document with all of our addresses is found on page 110. It says confidential across it. It also says this confidential information is not for public consumption. Do not publish this document. And yet it was published in our board packet. So I'd like to caution staff. Again, this is the second time this has happened. And frankly, it makes me uncomfortable. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Nick is nodding on that. We'll definitely address that to make sure that doesn't happen. Again, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Any further questions or discussions on this one? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Okay, Member Eckhoff.
Aye.
Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozag.
Aye.
Puchalski. Member Renahan.
Aye.
Rutledge. Member Selman.
Aye.
Member Zay. Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert, Member Desart,
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Okay, all ayes, that is approved. On to Public Works. Who's the Vice Chairman? Sean Noonan.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under Public Works agenda, I move for approval on PWP 23020, recommendation for the approval of a contract to Paladine Inc. For a contract total amount not to exceed $174,452.85.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Noonan.
Aye.
Member Ozog.
Aye.
Kirkowski. Member Renahan.
Aye.
Rutledge. Member Selman.
Aye.
Tornatori. Member Zay. Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert. Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye. Okay, all ayes, that's approved. Member Noonan.
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval on FMP 23120, recommendation for the approval of a contract to Commercial Electronic Systems, Inc. This one's for a contract total amount not to exceed $77,030 per renewal option under bid award 17-172 BF.
We have a motion. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Noonan.
Aye.
Member Ozog.
Aye.
Member Puchowski. Member Renahan.
Aye.
Rutledge. Member Selman.
Aye.
Member Tornatori. Member Zay. Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert. Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye. Okay, all ayes, that's approved. On to Stormwater, Chairman Zay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move on SMP 2920, approval of a contract issued to Stanley Consultants Professional Engineering Services, amount $164,000.
We have a motion and a second on this item. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Zay.
Aye.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozog.
Aye.
Member Puchowski. Member Renahan.
Aye.
Rutledge. Member Selman.
Aye.
Tornatori.
Okay, all ayes, that's approved. On to technology. Vice Chairman Ozog, I believe, member or Chairman Hart is not here yet.
Okay, we'll start with TEP 023520, recommendation for the approval of a contract purchase order to CDW Government, Inc. for the purchase and installation of upgrades to the current Citrix environment.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on this item. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Ozog.
No.
Puchowski. Member Renahan.
No.
Member Rutledge. Member Selman.
Aye.
Member Tornatori. Member Zay. Member Chaplin. Member Chaplin.
No.
Member Covert. Member Desart.
No.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan.
5 days and 11. All right, it's sufficient to pass, so that passes. Ozog.
Next item, TEP 0236-20, recommendation for the approval of a contract purchase order to CDW Government, Inc. for the purchase of small and large value technology equipment, including battery backups, monitors, large format touchscreen monitors, laptops, and scanners to aid department with remote work capabilities due to COVID for information technology for a contract amount total of $108,178.08 per cooperative purchase.
We have a motion and a second. I'm sorry, member Desart, did you have a question?
Second to start.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Ozog.
No.
Member Puchowski. Member Renahan,
No.
Member Rutledge, Member Stillman,
Aye.
Member Zay, Member Chaplin,
No.
Member Covert, Member Desart,
No.
Member DeCiani,
Aye.
Member Eckhoff, Member Elliott,
Aye.
Member Hart, Member Healy, Member Krajewski, Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan.
I believe 11 ayes. They're approved on the transportation. Chairman Chowski.
Contract of all construction, furnish and deliver curb.
You can't hear him very well. Sorry, Mr.
John?
Chairman.
Don, I'm sorry. Could you use the microphone? We can't hear. I'm sorry.
And okay, move to approve a contract of Volk Manufacturing Company to furnish and deliver curb shoes and plow blades as needed for a price not to exceed $33,395.25.
Second, Desart.
Motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Petrowski.
Aye.
Member Renahan.
Aye.
Member Rutledge. Aye. Member Selman.
Aye.
Tornatori. Member Zay.
Aye.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert. Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye.
Noonan.
Aye.
Member Ozol.
Aye.
Okay, all ayes, that's approved.
Move to approve DTP 23320 contract to Knight EA Engineering for professional phase 1 engineering for improvements along Fabian Parkway.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, roll call.
Member Petrowski.
Aye.
Member Renahan.
Aye.
Member Rutledge. Member Selman.
Aye.
Member Tornatori. Member Zay.
Aye.
Member Chaplin.
No.
Member Colbert. Member Desart.
No.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member
Aye.
Okay, 2 nays, the rest ayes, the matter is approved. Chairman Chowski.
Thank you. Move to approve an amendment to DTR 46820, amendment to a resolution for a local public agency agreement between the County of DuPage and Illinois Department of Transportation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on this item. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, roll call.
Member Petrowski.
Aye.
Member Renahan.
Aye.
Member Rutledge. Member Selman.
Aye.
Member Tornatori. Member Zay. Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Colbert. Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozog.
Aye.
Okay, all ayes, that's approved. Thank you. Chairman Chowski, on to finance resolutions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to combine and approve finance items A, B, and C. These are acceptance of appropriations.
We have a motion to combine and approve those three acceptance and appropriations. Any discussion as to any of them? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Member Colbert. Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozog.
Aye.
Member Petrowski. Member Renahan.
Aye.
Member Selman.
Aye.
Oops. Member Rutledge. Aye. Sorry about that. Member Tornatori.
Okay, all ayes, those are approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to combine and approve items D and E. These are all approval of grant agreements for nonprofit organizations and residential behavior, health providers, both COVID items.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to combine and approve these two items, D and E. Does anyone have any discussion as to either of them? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Zay.
Aye.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Colbert. Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani,
Aye.
Barakoff, Member Elliott,
Aye.
Member Hart, Member Healy, Member Krajewski, Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozog,
Aye.
Kowalski, Member Renahan,
Aye.
Rutledge, Member Spellman,
Aye.
Member Tornatori.
All right, thank you. Those are approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move on FIR 49620, placing names on payroll.
Motion second, placing names on payroll. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none.
Member Fay,
Aye.
Member
Aye.
Gilbert, Member DeSart,
Aye.
Member DeCiani,
Aye.
Barakoff, Member Elliott,
Aye.
Member Hart, Member Healy, Member Krajewski, Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozog,
Aye.
Kowalski, Member Renahan,
Aye.
Rutledge. Aye. Member Spellman,
Aye.
All ayes, that is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to combine and approve items G and H. These are both emergency procurements, and one is
Second.
court clerk administration operations fund.
Okay, so motion to combine and approve G and H. Second on that one. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? See a couple people for discussion. First, Member Ozak, then Member DeSart.
Okay, letter H. Is this not COVID? Or the first one appears to be COVID item. What about letter H?
We have our CFO here who's going to address that when we get to the podium.
Yes, good morning. This is not a procurement, it's an additional appropriation to the budget. In fiscal 20, our auditors found a budgeting error, if you will. After they caught it, we did adopt the 2020 budget. So this is a appropriation in company 1400, accounting unit 6710, to appropriately budget for all of the costs associated with this accounting unit. What's been happening is it's a county or a circuit court fund for operations, and it just hasn't been appropriated. So this is to comply with an auditor's recommendation that we fully budget for all of the expenses and not net the revenues against the expenses in that fund.
Okay, and this is not an expenditure out of general revenue, correct?
No, this is a separate fund. It's a non-general fund appropriation.
Okay, does that address your question, Member Ozak? I don't know if the auditor, any additional comment he wants to make on that or any clarity?
Is this, so can I understand that this is renaming this budget item? It is already included in FY20?
No, the appropriation is not. We already have the fund set up.
Okay,
We haven't appropriated or budgeted to the full amount, and the circuit court clerk would like us to do that based upon the outside auditor's recommendation that we do it. So it's just an accounting issue, if you will.
okay, thank you.
Expenditure of any general revenue funds. It's cleaning up the way that fund within the clerk's office is being accounted for.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the second question that I had about this agenda. And again, I would have emailed Nick if it were not a holiday, but my question is similar. Is this $894 already in the approved 2020 budget, or is this truly an additional expenditure? And I'm not clear on your answer that you gave, Member Ozog.
Yes,
It's truly an additional expenditure?
additional appropriation. It's not an expenditure. It's an additional appropriation to the budget. It's not general fund. It's a special revenue fund where the circuit court clerk is in charge of the operations of this fund. So based upon the outside auditor's recommendation from 2019, we are appropriating or budgeting the full expenditures within this fund based upon that recommendation.
Okay, but where does the money come from besides a special revenue fund? I don't understand.
If you look at the funding source up top,
Right.
the fund does generate revenue of administrative fees of $489,500. And the circuit court clerk also wants the reserve or the the fund balance or the savings of the money that's in the fund to be appropriated also. So that's how the $894,000 is derived.
And keep in mind, an appropriation is an authorization to spend. It's not an expenditure. So we're appropriating it for documentation purposes, but it's not a new expenditure. It's just formally giving the authorization under that fund for the money that's already being spent within the clerk's budget.
Okay, because it says additional appropriation. So you're saying it's not an additional appropriation. It's already been, always been there.
There's a small amount of money that was appropriated. This is the full amount that they're asking for.
And the smaller amount of money was the 489,000?
No, that's the revenue. I think there's $90,000 in this fund that was appropriated during the approval of the budget for 2020. So now they're asking for the full amount to be appropriated. Again, what's happening is when expenses are incurred in this fund, they're being charged against revenue. So the net amount, you don't see the full amount of the expenses. The auditors identified that and asked the county to fully appropriate or budget for this fund.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know that the auditor wants this funded. I'm just wondering where these funds come from.
The money is there already. The money is already there. It's not new money. The money's already there. You can't spend money on an account unless it's appropriated through the budget. So now what we're doing is the money's sitting there. We're appropriating the money to the circuit clerk's office.
So this was in the 2020 budget? If the money's already there, it was in the 2020 budget?
Just the revenue section, the administrative fee. And
Right, so
about $90,000 in expenses that was appropriated, but not the full amount.
This comes out of the circuit court clerk's court fees, and they've been spending the money because they have the authorization to spend that in the clerk's office. But the better accounting practice is for us to formally approve their ability to spend, even though they've already have the money through their own fund and they have been spending it under their own authorization. It is a second check on the process for us to say, we are appropriating, giving you permission to spend, similar to what we did with the health department a couple of weeks ago, where we increased their authorization or appropriation, even though we didn't actually give them the money to spend another $40 or $50 million, if you recall that.
Gotcha. But if their revenue is only 489,000, then they're asking for 894. So they're asking for 400,000 more than what the revenue is. Go ahead and take Mr. Elliott's question. Maybe he could shed light on this.
Balance.
I remember, Elliot, did you have a question?
There's a fund balance.
I don't think I understood this a couple of minutes ago, but I think I am beginning to understand it now. I just want to make sure, are you telling us that it was always anticipated in the 2020 budget that these expenses would be incurred and these funds would be paid, but what was happening was the clerk's office was just taking revenue and applying it to these expenses, and the auditor stepped in and said, you actually can't do it that way. By good accounting practice, you actually have to have a formal appropriation for this amount. Is that what's happened?
That is correct.
Okay, and then I think member Dessart raised a second question, which is, I think I heard you say initially that it was anticipated that the original amount would be the 894,000, but then I thought at some point somebody said, well, actually the revenue amount is substantially lower than that. So can you just clarify that point? Because I think I have the same, I don't know whether it's a question or concern, but the same issue I think as member Dessart.
Yes, there's money already set aside in this fund. It's a fund balance or reserve, like a savings account, specifically designated in this fund. And that amount is $404,500. So when you take that amount plus the revenue that's been generated, the total appropriation then would be $894,000. So it's a full appropriation of that fund based upon the expenses that the circuit court clerk wants to have appropriated.
I'm sorry.
So this is the first time I think I've heard you mention reserve fund. So if they're asking to spend part of the circuit clerk's reserve fund, is that wise business to go into our reserves?
Well, they are asking for it, and it's my understanding that they do have the ability to request and do that because the fund is under the administration of the circuit court clerk.
And I don't, again, this is an appropriation or authorization to spend. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to spend every penny that's being
Right.
They just want the full access to their fund with our permission, for lack of a better term, for them to spend that money.
Chairman, is there a way that we can pull this one item until we can find out more information about this or get some more documents about this? Because I'm not sure I'm comfortable voting on it today.
Well, I'm gonna, the auditor wants to maybe address this or clarify.
Go ahead. It's common budgeting practice for all special revenue funds that you appropriate, so that's the plan that the chairman was talking about. You take their entire leftover money that's in the account from the prior year plus revenue. So if you had $100 left over from last year and you're expecting $300 this year, the very common budgeting practice would be to appropriate $400 of spending for the next year. So that's the way, because that gives the incentive for those special revenue funds. Hey, I have a low spending this year, but it goes into the pot. I get to spend it next year. It all evens out in the long run. So that's what the common practice is for all special revenue funds, to appropriate, including the reserve balance.
And is this 404,000, Mr. Auditor, is that what you're telling us was left over from last year's fund? That's their existing balance?
Plus, and then you're getting up to the 8 when you're including the total revenue for anticipated for this year.
Okay, so I would at least view that differently than a reserve. I think someone used the term reserve. I don't know that I'd call that a reserve.
It's not normally what you would refer to as reserve. It is the reserve of that particular small revenue fund, special revenue fund. It's their leftover fund balance. I think that the CFO referred to it that way. So they get to spend their leftover money and their anticipated money. And the problem was it's kind of like when you get your paycheck. Do you think about it as your net pay, or do you say, oh, I get this gross amount minus all the taxes? And so what you're doing here is you are appropriating the gross salary that you would be getting and all the taxes and the getting, as opposed to just doing a net check. And that's what this is fixing. Really, there's no additional spending that's going on. There's no additional revenue. It's just we're breaking apart where we were blending revenue and expense.
Okay, anybody else have any questions or comments on this item? Yanni?
I would assume, being that this is a special fund, that the funds that are taken into this particular fund could not be used for any other purpose. Is that correct?
The circuit court clerk's office has certain guidelines they have to follow for how they can spend that money.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this item? Member Chaplin? And then come back to you, members. Member Chaplin, I can't hear you. If you're talking, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you. So we were told it was reserve funds, and now it's a leftover balance from last year. So so just for clarification, he's not tapping into reserves. He's tapping into he's carrying over funds that were left from last year into this year. And it's not reserves technically, is that correct? Because now we're hearing we're hearing reserve funds, and then we're hearing leftover funds. Just to be clear on what we're voting on, to make sure that we have everything.
It's technically the same thing. It's the savings, if you will, or the reserve of this fund.
Many of the special revenue funds have balances that carry over from year to year.
Yes.
Give them the full authorization through an appropriation to spend up to that amount, even though in all likelihood they won't spend the entire amount. I see the clerk of the, hang on, I see the clerk of the circuit court is wanting to chime in here, so maybe you can clarify this.
Thank you.
Good morning, members. Yeah, that term that we're using, that you are using in terms of a fund balance as opposed to a balance. This particular account, like all of these, do have balances that carry over. There are some small, some less, and we just carry them over per year. There are fees, fines, and costs that are collected by statute and are placed into these funds. Dock storage, court automation, operations, all of these are specific to the statutes. These fees are collected and put into these, for lack of a better term, pot okay, into these separate different buckets. Okay, they may not be transferred to general fund or to any other fee or any other account. So if they're not used through the fiscal year, there is a remaining balance. And I hate to use that term reserve because that's not appropriate, because it's just a balance that carries over each year. Some is greater, might be 200,000 or 300 or 400,000 in 1 year. There might be as little as 100,000, because again, it's based on the revenue that comes in that is specifically directed by the statute, okay, through whatever fees, fines, and costs are attached to these specific accounts. So the money is not interchangeable, it's not fungible, and it is used solely for this particular, in this case, the operations administration of the office. It was noted by the auditor that while we have been doing this for a number of years and the same practice, it is found best practices at this point to now go back and assert that the entire amount, okay, which would be the revenue and the remaining balance, okay, carried over, the carried over balance shall be put together under one appropriation. And that's where this is coming from. There's no difference. There's no adding. There's no changing or movement between any administration or any other funds.
Okay, Member Desart.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that explanation. So if your revenue, if you have $404,000 leftover revenue from last year from fees and things that have come into the office, then could possibly since you didn't spend that money last year, could possibly your ask of the general fund be $404,000 less for 2021? Moving forward?
No, because these are separate line items. The line items that are funded under the general fund are a specific group, okay? The operations and administration part of the office has a specific criteria that you can use this money for.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments on this item? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Shea.
Aye.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Mareva. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski. Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozog.
Aye.
Kowski. Member Renahan.
Aye.
Member Rutledge. Member Selman.
Aye.
Moratory.
Did you record Member Krajewski's vote? He did jump on now,
He did. Oh,
He
I
did.
did not have him.
and he said aye. We got it?
Got it.
Okay, all ayes, that is approved. Those two are approved. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to combine and approve items I and J. This is allocation of $1 million to do for CARES Act money to park districts. And the other item is the intergovernmental agreement between the county and the various.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. As you'll recall, when we had our very lengthy meeting and back in June on the CARES Act, one of the things we decided to do was authorize funds to help support the park districts and their operations as they deal with COVID items. This addresses those issues. So we have a motion and a second. I see Member Ozog has a question or comment.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or discussions on these two items? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Shea.
Aye.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert. Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Cuff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski.
Aye.
Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozog.
Aye.
Member Puchalski. Member Renahan.
Aye.
Member Rutledge. Aye. Member Selman.
Aye.
Moratory.
All ayes, that's approved.
Thank you, Mr.
Those two are
Chairman.
approved.
Move to combine items K and L. This is, first one is an allocation of $300,000 from CARES Act money to the DuPage County Coalition of Flu Vaccination Program. And the second is the approval of the agreement between the DuPage County Coalition and DuPage County to administer that vaccine program.
Second, Selman.
Okay, we have a motion and a second from Member Selman. Any discussion on this item? This is the item that Member Selman brought to our attention, and we put together this program that hopefully will help people get flu vaccines so that we try not to overburden the system as we go into what's going to be a very interesting fall. Any other questions or comments on this item? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Say,
Aye.
Member Chaplin,
Aye.
Member Colvert, Member Dessart,
Aye.
Member Luciani,
Aye.
Member Eckhoff, Member Elliott,
Aye.
Hart, Member Healy, Member Krajewski,
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan, Member Ozak,
Aye.
Member Patelski, Member Renahan,
Aye.
Member Rutledge.
Aye.
Member Selman.
Aye.
Member Tory.
All ayes, those are approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Move to combine items M and N. This is the allocation of $2,025,000 CARES Act funding to the townships reimbursement program, and FIR 50320 is the intergovernmental agreement between the 9 townships.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Again, this was a matter that we talked about at our CARES Act meeting. We finally got to the point where we were in agreement with the townships. And I have to say, by the way, Connor McCarthy's been doing an unbelievable job in working these programs out, negotiating, drafting far more intergovernmental agreements than he had ever intended to do in his lifetime. Appreciate his tremendous efforts in this regard. Any questions or comments on either of these two items? I see Member Krajewski.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just had one question. I was asked this of a township official. If the township doesn't use all 225,000 or approximately their allocation, does the county then retain that money, or can the township give it to one of the other townships?
Well, the agreement we worked out, and this was a long discussion that went back and forth, and if you see the agreement, what they asked for was the flexibility that if there are certain townships that don't spend to their caps, that other townships who exceed their cap expenditures have the ability to tap into those resources, even though in all likelihood, we probably won't spend the entire $2 million, but that way certain townships have food pantries that are far more expensive than their expenditures are much greater than other townships. So this agreement allows that flexibility.
Okay, that's what I thought, and they had that question asked to me, and then I want to thank Connor too for the Downers Grove has the not-for-profit food pantry, so they added that language.
Any further questions or comments on these two items?
And Mr. Chairman, it is in there. If they do have additional appropriation, they can come to the county board and seek, if they go over that cap, if they have additional funding needed.
Set at a time frame that once we've determined as we go forward that certain townships will not fully expend, they still have to come to us. It's still going to go through the same accounting process that the municipalities, the park districts, and everyone else are going to go through with our own auditor and our independent auditing group that we hired to go through these funds to make sure that they're spending in compliance with the CARES Act. But that's the process we laid out to give them some greater flexibility. Any further questions, comments, discussions on these two items? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Say,
Aye.
Member Chaplin,
Aye.
Member Colvert, Member Dessart,
Aye.
Member Luciani,
Aye.
Member Eckhoff, Member Elliott,
Aye.
Member Hurt, Member Healy, Member Krajewski,
Aye.
Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozog,
Aye.
Patelski, Member Renahan,
Aye.
Member Rutledge.
Aye.
Member Selman,
Aye.
Torn Tory.
All right, all ayes, those are approved under informational.
No, I got one more left. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Move on
Right.
FIR 50120, approval of issuance of payments to small business and contractors for small business relief grant funds.
Second.
97,426.
Right. Almost skipped over that important one. We got a motion and a second. Again, latest tranche. That seems to be the in vogue word. As you know, we opened up the portal again to allow businesses that couldn't access funds originally because we excluded those who received PPP money, but they've come to us and said they still have a lot of needs out there. We opened up the portal again. They had over 1,000 applications right off the bat, and this is the first of that group of expenditures. Member Ozon.
I would just like some clarification about, is this new money versus what we've already approved for expenditure? I think we approved 7 million, and is this 2 million on top of that? I need some clarification about that.
We originally approved 7 million with an agreement to approve an additional 7 million. Assuming that the first 7 million was exceeded, and we discussed the issue of opening it up for PPP money. So we're in that second 7 million at this point.
So this 2 million is part of that 7 million second level of allocation.
Right. I think we finally finished off the first 7 million and kind of.
Okay. So we can report to our constituents that this is new funding for Choose DuPage to administer small business relief.
We approved up to $17 million
Okay.
this back in June, but this is the formal continuation.
Okay. So it is new funding into the pot, basically, of what we already approved.
Matter of semantics. It depends how you talk, but we did.
There's money in the bank.
We did have that. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Member Renahan, then Member Desart, then Member Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear, Greg Bedeloff said that this was going to probably be closing early last week. Are you saying that it's still open for application?
No. So what happened was when we had come close to exhausting the first $7 million, which had the restriction of the PPP money on it, then we came back to the board and said, we're about done with that. We're going to lift that restriction, which we approved 2 weeks ago. We reopened the portal, but they had over 1,000 applications right off the bat, which would exceed the next tranche of money that we authorized. So they closed the portal again while they process these, and then we'll determine, as we did with the original group, whether those expenditures, if approved, are going to exceed the money that we've authorized. If they are, they may come back to us for that last $3 million that we talked about. If they're not, they may reopen the portal to allow anybody who missed it the second time to get back into it. But they have to weigh these applications to make sure that the money is still there. And as I think Greg Bedeloff said when we went through this the first time, they don't want to take so many people that they end up having to turn them away because they've accepted more applications than they can actually ever fund.
Okay, so closed.
Right now it is closed. Member Desart. You're on mute, Dawn.
I had conversations with Greg via email last week and phone messages, and he said it's closed right now because they think that they're up to the money. So my question for this board is, our small businesses are still hurting. You've seen Main Street in your communities. I've been downtown Naperville, downtown Aurora. My question for this board is, should we consider putting more money into this pot? Because there is no money in the bank right now. To Member Ozog's point, there's no money. It's been closed because we think that we've given all 17 million away. So should we think about adding more money to this pot? Thank you.
And I'll just note, we obviously can't vote on that right now, but we're open to discussing that. But if you recall, what Greg had said when we had the first group was they can only process so many at a time. As it turned out, when they opened the portal the first time, they started going through those that were actually eligible. They didn't have enough to finish off the entire 7 million, which is why they reopened the portal with the first group that they had. And so now they're processing the second group. It may not actually exhaust the money that's in the funds. We don't know. They just wanted to make sure that if everybody requested the maximum that was available, that they wouldn't exhaust the fund. So,
you know what, Chairman, I see that Greg Bedeloff is on the phone. Maybe he could answer what's going on, how we're doing. Greg?
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So I think Chairman Larson crystallized it pretty well. It's part art, part science. And based on the rejection rate we had in phase 1, if we were to apply that same rejection rate to phase 2, if you will, we would exhaust nearly all of the 17 million that you all had allocated. So our current run now, and then the rejection rate for phase 2 is actually much lower than the rejection rate was for phase 1. So I think that's good news. The applications that we're receiving are folks who had received PPP. So their applications are a little more complete, more information is being provided, and these businesses have gone through this process already. So that's why we had to close it, as Chairman Larson indicated. And I think moving forward, you have 2.1 million, I believe, in front of you today. Last check as of this morning, the next batch that'll come in front of you will be at least another 2 million, and we'll continue that until we expend the entire 17 million. I wish I had a crystal ball to say there's a need for another 20 million out there, but it would simply be anecdotal at this point. But yeah, it is closed, and we just felt like, based on the money you allocated, if we left it open for a longer period of time, we'd get into maybe as many as 100 businesses that we would have to say, sorry, we date stamp these and we time stamp the applications when they come in using a first come, first serve approach. You unfortunately would be time stamped out of the process.
Member Elliott, Member Ozak, thank you, Greg.
I think this is a great program, and I think it's one that we ought to consider, maybe 2 weeks from now, taking a look at what our reserves look like from other portions of the COVID money and see if we can expend more money on it. I think today, under the Open Meetings Act, we're pretty limited to just approving this $2 million, but I would favor taking a look and seeing whether we can expand this in the future.
We can certainly do that. And Greg, maybe you can give a presentation and then we can, the finance department, kind of give a sense of where our fund balance is or the amount we've authorized so far. And frankly, where we are COVID wide, you've seen what the numbers are and where we have expended money on already and committed it, what we have remaining available. Again, not knowing how this fall is going to turn out and who we're supporting, but certainly it's a worthwhile endeavor to keep an eye on that and see if we want or need to authorize additional beyond the now 17 million will be appropriated for this money. But yeah, we can take a look at that in a couple of weeks and see where we are. Member Ozak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Greg. Is there, or has it been considered having an opportunity for a waiting list in case we do go ahead with further funding beyond the 17 million? Just to clarify, you basically have enough people right now in the pipeline that you've covered all of the 17 million? I just need to clarify that.
We feel very strongly that based on the current run rate in terms of the amount that the businesses are asking for and we're awarding,
okay,
as well as the current rejection rate and the historical rejection rate we had from the original 7 million that you allocated, that we will deploy all of the 17 million with the applicants that we have in the pipeline now. So your question, your statement is absolutely correct. With the people we feel, and again, I wish it was 100% scientific, but we feel with the number of applicants we're currently administering and reviewing, we will hit the 17 million. And have potentially some folks, to your point, left over. And everybody who applies is told that we have a finite amount of money and it is a first come, first serve basis.
In your first phase, would you say the majority of rejections were based on having received PPP and not understanding that that was a criteria?
Yeah, I have a report on that, Member Ozog, that we can provide to you, but anecdotally, yes, the number one reason for rejection was already received PPP money, which is why we came back to you all and said, perhaps you should reconsider it because these businesses admitted that they got PPP and they still applied looking for additional relief.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm advised, by the way, that right now, the county-wide unallocated funds that we have, not including our own contingency that we're likely to spend most of to cover our own CARES Act expenses is about $8.5 million. So keep that in mind. If there are any other things that come up along the way, including any crises in the fall, that's all we have left that's not allocated. Renham.
Thanks. Greg, just to follow up on that. So the first tranche, whatever, how we want to call it, the people that were rejected because they had already received PPP, did we circle back with them or did they have to reapply? Kind of how did that roll?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Member Renahan. Every applicant who was rejected because they'd received PPP, their information that they presented to us, email, phone number, et cetera, was kept in our application portal. And they all received an email informing them that the portal had been reopened and the PPP ineligibility clause had been removed. So yes, everybody who applied and was told no, got the opportunity right off the bat to apply in the second phase.
Excellent, thank you.
And again, thanks to Greg, to you and your team. Terrific job with this program from start to finish, and to those people who volunteered on the committee to review these things on their own time. Again, our thanks for the work that everyone's doing. Any further questions or comments on this item? Seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Zay.
Aye.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert. Member Dessart.
Aye.
Luciani.
Aye.
Greco. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski.
Aye.
Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozog.
Aye.
Chowski. Member Renahan.
Aye.
Rutledge. Aye. Member Selman.
Aye.
Auditorium.
All ayes, those are approved. Thank you. On informational?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to receive and place on file A, payment of claims, B, appointments, C, grant proposal notifications.
We have a motion and a second to receive and place on file those items. Any discussion as to any of them? Seeing and hearing none, roll call please.
Member Say.
Aye.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert. Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Rockoff. Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart. Member Healy. Member Krajewski.
Aye.
Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan. Member Ozog.
Aye.
Member Pachowski. Member Renigan.
Aye.
Rutledge. Aye. Member Spelman.
Aye.
Ayes, those are received and placed on file. Thank you. Now we are on to our favorite portion of the day, our budget presentation, and we have a presentation from our auditor. Mr. Grogan, how are you, sir?
Don't you have appointments and grants? Sorry, never mind.
Since originally Chairman Larson said that the coroner was going to be presenting, I will just say, to quote Mark Twain, that the reports of my needing the coroner is greatly exaggerated. Yes. So a couple quick, this will be very quick. I know you guys are used to very long budget hearings, but as it's been referred to, my entire budget is a change order in stormwater size. You all should have received Friday a copy of the budget as presented. Couple quick things just to talk about the scope of my office. I am vastly, majority of my expending is personnel. We have a staff of 7. It has been at that level since 1988. Across my 7 staff, which includes myself, we have 4 CPAs, 2 certified government audit professionals. Some people overlap some of these qualifications. 1 certified internal auditor, 1 certified information auditor, and 2 certified fraud examiners. The non-personnel portion of my budget is half of what it used to be 12 years ago when I first took office. As the budget folks will tell you, at the end of the year, we're literally transferring $1 here and $1 there just because we run it very tight. A couple of things of other, you're familiar with the fact that my office, produces standalone internal audits, averaging around 100 a year. We also, one of the very big portions of what we do is we review all the claims before they are paid. So that's the checks before they go out the door. The average is maybe 60,000 a year. Last year, we rejected about 2,000 of them, $10 million worth. Now that being said, a rejection does not mean that it's a hard savings. We're rejecting, we review claims, first, to make sure it's following federal law, state law, ordinance and resolutions that are approved by the county, contracts that we have to abide by. And then at the bottom of the list is, best practices, common sense. Not every rule of thumb is put in writing. And so we will reject things because there's maybe documentation is incomplete, needs clarification, and most of that does come back. Though from time to time, there are actually hard savings that we get out of that. In addition to reviewing claims and performing standalone audits, my office also is the holder of the authorizations database. So that means if you need to know who has the authority to spend money out of, say, that special revenue fund that we were talking about earlier, or any number of the county board funds, that is my office that keeps track of to make sure that the right people are authorized to be able to approve spending. We also maintain a transparency portal. We also produce a number of internal reports that are used as reference around the county. We have an audit hotline where we get tips on fraud, waste, and abuse. And then probably the most amorphous, gray, but exceedingly busy part of my job is we just help with general best practices, whether it's a couple years ago, we were doing the merger with Highland Hills. I was asked to serve on the working group for well over a year, just trying to deal with those details because of the expertise that myself or my office has in governmental accounting. And then, as you probably all are familiar with as of now, I am steeply involved in the COVID grant money. And that comes from, my experience with federal grants and just general accounting practices. And, nothing ever really ends up being my decision, but I think it's a common attribute here at the county is, hey, why don't you bounce that off the auditor? I can very easily just give my opinion after the fact and say, oh, you should have done it this way, and here's why. Or people can come in advance and we can talk it through and I can give my insights as to how things should run. But back to the budget, we do, for the 2021 proposed budget, we are requesting actually a slight decrease, about 5.6%. I'm able to do that. I haven't had turnover in, I think it's been 8 or 9 years. But this year I will be at the end of the year. My chief deputy, who has over 30 years experience, will be retiring. And I expect to take some time to figure out as far as new hire or restructuring in the office. So because of that lag time, I'm going to take advantage of that to reduce my budget for the coming year. If you have to do the 10, 20, or 30% walk downs, that just means we're going to have less auditors in the building and there will be less auditing done. And that's sort of always been the way of cutting my budget, as my non-personnel is very low. If you need to cut my budget, it will just result in less auditors in the building. That's the extent of my presentation. If anybody has any questions.
Okay, I'll open it up to the committee for questions. Member Desart.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the information. So you're giving us a 5.6% decrease. I'm wondering what it would look like. I know the board has given all of our department heads a directive to give us a 10%, 20%, 30% decrease, or what that would look like in your office. So what would a 10% or a 20% decrease look like for your office? Thank you.
Those are columns in the spreadsheet that was sent out on Friday. So next to I'm actually requesting, that's not the 10, 20, 30. I'm actually requesting that my budget be lower than it was this prior year. But the 10% would take my personnel budget down to 523 from the 580-ish that was for this year. 20%, as in the second or third to last column, would be 464. And then 30% would be 405, and each of those would be representative in 1 or 2 head count.
Okay, any further questions, comments, discussions from the committee on the auditor's report, auditor/coroner's report? Seeing and hearing none, thank you.
Thank you,
Auditor Grogan, appreciate it. Okay, our next discussion item is a discussion regarding potential relief options under the second installment of the 2019 property tax payments. As everyone is aware, we allowed for DuPage County taxpayers to pay as late as September 1 for their first installment without incurring any late penalty fees. We have not authorized anything beyond that. However, we have had several people, Member Ozog, and so forth, and a bunch of other members of the committee raised questions, and some of the public has raised questions about what other options may be available to us to provide some additional relief to property taxpayers. One option being discussed would be to create a fund under the CARES Act money that we have to at least allow people to seek reimbursement for any penalties they incur. So that's sort of the issue that's before us. Is anybody doing a specific presentation on this, Nick, or?
Oh, that's right. No, there was, I know there's a lot of discussion among the board members last week, whether this is a program you want to move forward with. And in light of that, we put on discussion. I did ask Treasurer Henry to be available today. I know that she has obviously a lot of in-depth knowledge of it, as well as I'm not sure if the state's attorney looked about the legality And I know that their state's attorney and maybe Connor looked at it as well, but I would maybe recommend opening up to Treasurer Henry to give at least a kickoff for what it would mean to her office and whether it's even possible to do, and then open up for discussion among the board members.
Okay, Treasurer Henry, are you on the line, or somebody from your office on the line?
No, I'm here, and Paul Hines is here, and Donna Pindell from the state's attorney's office is here, is also here. So we don't know exactly the potential project or proposal that you think you might have, but the one we've heard about is troublesome at best. We have, just so you know, as of Friday night, we had collected 95% of the total levy of the $2.99 billion. And that's not all that will get in for the September 1st date. It takes a few more days to get everything from the lockbox and the banks that receive payments. So we have more money coming in for the second installment. So the money coming in has really been very, very good. We've been very pleased with the payments coming in. We have gotten maybe 2 calls about extending the penalty, but we've explained that the state law, when they passed this in May, I guess, Donna, was it in May? Yes. They specifically said that the second installment would be due on the due date, and our due date was September 1st, and it did not anticipate any extension of penalties. So the proposal we've heard is potentially grants coming from Mary Keating's office for people to pay their penalties. There's no explanation of, do you have to have been affected by COVID? Is this a new person that has never been late paying their penalties before? Just so you know, the tax sale will not be coming up till January or February. And normally at the tax sale, you guys receive about $600,000 to $700,000 in penalties for your general fund. Those could be conceivably taken away with this proposal. I don't really know what your proposal is going to be, but these are people that are repeatedly late in paying their things. So I think there's I don't know what you're proposing, but I think there has to be a lot of study, and we've talked with Donna about it as to whether or not this would be appropriate for COVID money. And so we're not the auditors, so you can't say what is the case, but we don't believe this is COVID expenditures. But Donna, I'd let you comment on what you've researched.
I would agree with Gwen, and I have a concern statutorily when the law is changed, it's usually prospective, and this seems to be retrospective because the second installment was due September 1st. And now we're going back retrospectively and changing the law, and that's a concern.
Well, let me just clarify a couple of points, because at least, and I'll let some of the folks who brought this to my attention speak to the issue of what they're looking at. But nobody's talking about, at this point, changing any laws, changing any deadlines. I wanted to clarify the issue of the quote unquote tax sale, because I think the public sometimes understands that the tax sale is the sale of the tax payment obligations. It is not a tax sale of someone's home. Basically,
Always made that clear.
Again?
We've always made that clear to the taxpayers as well.
I understand. Some of them don't seem to get that point. So I just wanted to clarify that nobody's home goes up for sale in January if they fail to pay their taxes. It gives an outside entity the ability to buy that obligation and pursue it. And then at some point in time, they can put a lien on the house. And if that doesn't get satisfied, a couple of years down the road, somebody could theoretically lose their home. But those in the public who are thinking that a tax sale means their house is going to go up for auction in a few months, that's not the way this process works. But in terms of the legality of what we're talking about here, at least as I've discussed it with Member Ozog and a few other people, is not talking about changing the deadline for payment of taxes. I know we don't have the authority to do that, nor the authority to change the tax sale deadline, which was moved by statute from November into January. But the possibility of setting up some sort of a fund, just as we have to provide relief to other people in other circumstances, for instance, the Small Business Relief Fund, to help them address what will remain their legal obligations to pay tax penalties. We're not talking about eliminating those penalties, but potentially offering funds to help them address those. So that's what we're talking about. Let me open it up for the discussions of any of the members who want to talk about it. Member Ozog, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, McHenry County, I saw in the Daily Herald, had done something similar. Their tax date is later than ours, and I not checked on what their final result was, but that's what gave me the initial idea. And I especially want to thank Member Krajewski, who came up with the idea of possibly using CARES money. The constituent that I want to address is the woman who addressed our meeting 2 weeks ago. She is one of my constituents and has suffered a job loss since June 1st and was able to make the June 1st payment. So what I'd be looking for is a criteria that is a really directly either a job loss or a significant loss of income. And we can pretty much assume that that would be based on a COVID situation if we even go back to May 1st or June 1st or something along those lines. So it would be very specific to COVID. Job loss is a pretty clear one. Chances are it's hard to know what the demand is. I suspect the demand is higher than the number of calls that would be received. It's hard to know how people know who to contact or what to do, but I also suspect that it may not be anywhere close to $500,000 because we would make the criteria very specific where it would definitely be COVID related. And I want to thank everyone who worked on this real quickly, but especially Member Krajewski. And let's keep the discussion open. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Member Krajewski, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I did have some discussion after Member Ozog had asked me about the possibility with both Nick and then Bob Grogan trying to come up with something that would qualify under CARES Act. Mary Keating's office, I know, has the ability to look at people for low income and some of the programs that they give out. So if it's COVID related, I did talk with Paul Hines on Friday. I think in the first installment, we had, I think it was like 1,968, something like that, that I guess got penalized or hadn't paid their taxes on time. Of those, 1,600 and roughly 50 have already paid the first installment. So there's only 354 that are outstanding. And I think Gwen just mentioned we had 95% or more that have paid already. And so it's probably going to be a very small amount of people that would, need the relief. And it's similar to grants that we've given out, like you said, for the small businesses, but also we've given townships money for the food pantries for people that are in need. So I think the qualifications would be there if the board's interested in granting relief. The question is, do we have the staff capacity and time to go through the applications that we may get with the criteria to grant the relief?
Remember, Mary Keating has raised her hand on that. I will note, by the way, actually, they weren't penalized because we gave them that delay. Of the 1,900 or so originally who applied, 1,600 were able to make the payment by the September 1st deadline, and then there are another 300. But I know there's some issues with Mary's and her staff who are stretched very thin trying to address a lot of these CARES Act issues. But Mary, if you can comment, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you raising the issue of staff capacity. We certainly in the department run a number of programs where we do income qualify folks for what, be it rental assistance or energy assistance. So we certainly have the capability, but in terms of our current capacity, I would be extremely concerned about taking on another program. Our information referral calls are up to 20% year over year. Our calls for rental assistance are taking us at least a week to get back to people. So like I said, in terms of our ability to look through people's income documentation, certify that it was a COVID related income loss, I'm not concerned there, but I'm very, very, very concerned about our capacity from a staffing perspective.
Okay, Member Chaplin. And then
Thank you, Chairman. I was just wondering if I know we hired a third party to come in and look at our COVID expenses. Is this something we could hand over to that third party to take a look at and do, or would that be out of the scope of work for them?
Well, theoretically, we could do something like what we did with the small business relief program and what we're looking at with the flu vaccine program. I think the question is how many people are out there and what entity is willing to take on that responsibility at this point, and what expense would be associated with bringing somebody else in to do that versus the benefit that we're providing. Keep in mind, we're talking about the tax penalties, not the actual tax payment.
Yes. Yep.
You know, if anybody knows of an entity that wants to jump in at this point, certainly that's something worthy of consideration. Yeah, the auditor, he's shaking his head vigorously. No. Member Renahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mary Keating, for speaking up. I was going to say something as well. I mean, community services is stretched, and I really see this as something more a job for the treasurer if we go forward with this. It looks to be a small amount of people. Maybe we do the honor system as we did before. You sign off on something and say, I'm desperate to do it. But I'm also wondering too, could this also be done by education? Like Chairman Larson, you bring up a great point about people just don't understand the difference of selling tax obligation versus selling their house. And that was, poignantly seen at our last meeting when we had a woman speak up and, tearfully said she thought she was going to lose her house. So I wonder if, Treasurer Henry, maybe if we can get some education out, that can get us halfway there in terms of how things work.
We could certainly do that. And one of the things I've always stressed to people also is if your property goes to tax sale, it's not if your taxes go to tax sale, it's not the worst thing in the world. It is often you're getting a loan that you couldn't get from anywhere else. And we've had this question come up over the years. Somebody said, I just can't I've lost my job. I just can't make the payment. Well, this is somebody that makes you a loan for 2.5 years so that you can actually pay it back. We have had a number of people already pay some penalties for the second installment because they didn't pay on time. And I'm sure that there will be more coming in and paying. So the question that we would have to look at is to have the people that have already paid have the ability to go back and ask for a grant for the taxes, the penalties that they paid on their taxes, because it was a struggle for them to do that. And that becomes another question. Could we do it? Yeah, sure, we could do this program just as we did the first one. But is it the best thing for the taxpayers to do might be the question, and whether or not we can, as our state's attorney said, do it appropriately.
Member Torres.
Mr. Chairman, while I appreciate the problems that some people have in making these, and I'm not necessarily opposed to it, although I think it's fraught with a number of potential problems, the question that I would pose is how different is somebody's inability to pay their real estate taxes from their ability to pay their mortgage payment or their rent or their credit card bill? It seems to me that if we allocate money to pay back people who have to pay a penalty to us because they haven't paid their payment by September 1st, we're essentially looking at appropriating COVID money merely to put into our pockets as the county so that we don't have to suffer that loss while we're waiting for people to make their payments. The optics of that bother me. It appears that we're using the COVID funds to line our own pockets because we're not getting the money from the taxpayers when they're supposed to have paid it, when a bank can make the same argument, or a landlord can make the same argument, or a credit card company can make the same argument. Why doesn't the county establish a COVID relief fund for those people who are late in their rent payments or their mortgage payment? Why is the county and the real estate tax department and the treasurer get this preferred treatment of COVID money and we don't? I think the optics of it are problematic, as well as all of the other issues that the treasurer mentioned. So I think given the fact that the tax sale deadline has been extended, that if somebody doesn't make the payment, they're not going to lose their house for a long time. The tax sale is not going to happen for an additional amount of money or additional amount of months. That in and of itself is a protection. But the optics to me is that we're taking COVID money and lining our pockets with it because we don't want to suffer the consequences as a county of the delinquency of these payments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And obviously we have legal obligations we have to address. I do think Treasurer Henry makes a great point, which is this is effectively becomes, and this won't even happen for another 4 months, 3-4 months before we get to January, before anybody has any legal implications from this other than the accumulation of penalties, but that they will get what is essentially a loan that they now have 2.5 years to pay back. And what concerns me is if we authorize so much money on the administration of a program that may not help a whole lot of people, we spend more money on administration than we do on actually helping people in a circumstance where that may be available. But with that, I'm going to let, actually, Mary, I'll come back to you, but I'm going to let a couple people who haven't spoken before speak. So Member Zay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just what are we talking about? What is the penalty for not paying your property tax? Are we talking large amount? Is it 2%, 10%? I mean, what is it at that point?
I think it's 1.5% or something. Treasurer, can you address
It's
that?
it's 1.5% per month.
So what's the average fine then?
Well, it depends on the amount of your real estate taxes.
Right.
So sometimes it's as low as $15, and sometimes if you've got a huge tax bill, it may be a couple $100.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else who hasn't spoken? All right, Member Ozak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. First of all, Member Renahan brings up a really good point about explaining to the public what happens with the tax sale, which is something I really wasn't familiar with. So Gwen, my questions for you is you're not sure when the sale date is yet. Is that by statute? Does the state decide that? How is that January date decided?
The date has to do with when we no longer have a problem or not a disaster, but the COVID emergency. And then the way it works, we actually have to go to court and get permission to offer these taxes for sale. And then the tax buyers come in. We have to worry about things like the same thing everybody else is. If we have 75 tax buyers come in, we have to be able to socially distance them so that we can actually carry out the sale. It's all done electronically, but it's not something that we can do away from here. We'll have to have it set up here so they come in and buy and pay us. So it's not a complicated process, but we just are a little bit unsure of the final date, and we're working through those now to see if we can determine for sure when it's going to be.
So that date is set by you, our treasurer.
Right. But we have to do it in conjunction with the dates that we've been given by the state and what's going on in the.
Okay, so when the emergency order is lifted, you can't do anything until that emergency order is lifted for that activity. Is that correct?
Yes and no.
Okay. Now my other question is, I understand there's issues there, but my other question is, when your property taxes are sold, is it the flat amount? Say you owed $5,000. Does the $5,000 accrue? Say you owed $5,000 and you had to pay $400 in fees that accrued during September through December. Would that $400 in fees be excused and then the $5,000 would be sold? And my second part of that question is, are there any other fees that are being accrued during the 2.5 years where the taxes are owned by the investor?
The interest rate will adjust during those 2.5 years, but originally what is sold is the amount of the taxes and any accrued penalties that are accrued up to that point. There could be a whole years of penalties, for example. And then there are statutory fees that are attached to that. And then what happens is it goes to the sale and the bid. So you can explain this. I'll let Paul explain it further. Do you want to go ahead and explain what happens once we get to the sale?
Sure. So we're selling the taxes and the penalties to the tax buyer. And so they bid and they start at 18%, and the lowest percent bid wins. So it's an auction that goes reverse. So the taxpayer may bid and say, I'll pay your taxes with a 2% interest penalty. Okay. Then you pay 2% every 6 months. It rolls every 6 months is that interest is until you pay off the taxes. So
okay. And can you pay off the taxes anytime while it's being held by the investor?
Yes, but you have to pay it in full. So say if you, in your example, the taxes are sold for $5,400, and say they bid 0%. So in 6 months, it would roll again if there was interest. If there was no interest, you could come in and pay the 5,400 and then it would be paid in full. The county already has collected their money from the tax buyer, is already paying the districts, the taxing districts, and we've already distributed that amount of money.
Okay, so, and let me also ask you this, in terms of the recent tax sales, would you say that the interest rate that they've received has been somewhat similar to CPI?
Even less. They've been going for 1 or 2% or 0. And the question, one reason why they bid 0 is in the future years, if you don't pay it in year 2, they can come in and what we call pay subsequent year taxes. So the tax buyer has first dibs on your taxes the following year if you don't pay them in the first year.
Okay, so then that could be extending the 2.5 years, is that correct?
No, so basically, and again, it gets in the type of property it is, but basically a home, you have basically 3 years. So if your taxes get sold 3 years, you can petition the court for a deed.
Okay, and then it's a different time frame for commercial.
Right.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Thank you. That explains a good deal. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments on this discussion item? Seeing and hearing none. Thank you, Gwen. Thanks to everyone who contributed to this process. I'm not sure that we have any kind of a good solution. If anybody wants to come to this committee with a concrete proposal, we're certainly willing to entertain it. I just don't know that there's an easy option available to us, but I appreciate everybody's feedback on this item. Thank you, Mary and Brian, for bringing this to our attention and having this fruitful discussion that hopefully will educate the public. With that, our next matter is old business. Does anybody have any old business? Seeing and hearing none, does anyone have any new business? I see Member Elliott.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to raise a couple of issues coming up on the Economic Development Committee. First of all, as many of you may remember, a few weeks ago, Chairman Cronin announced that DuPage County was going to move forward with a disadvantaged business enterprise program. And I'm really pleased that at next week's economic development meeting, we're going to have Colette Holt, who is a nationally recognized advisor in this area, who has been retained by DuPage County, I think some months ago, to assist in creating this program, is going to be presenting at the Economic Development Committee. And I would encourage all of the board members, both those on the committee and those not on the committee, to attend, because what she is going to outline, I believe, is that this is a very serious commitment by the county. It's going to have significant costs, and it's one that's going to have significant structural change. Maybe I shouldn't say structural change, but there will be, I think at a minimum, one of the things she's going to propose is that we have a new staff person who is devoted entirely to issues of diversity and inclusion. Which I think is a pretty important step for our county. And so I can tell you that I very much embrace this program. And I think that we're going to have to recognize that there are certain costs we're going to have to incur to take this step, some of which I believe will be in this budget year. And I've already spoken to senior staff about the budget implications for this year, and some of which may be in our next budget year. But I think all of us need to understand exactly what the steps are going to be to move forward with this.
Okay, thank you, Member Elliott. Member Coburn.
I just want to thank Member Elliott for working on this really important project. Thank you so much. We discussed this in the Complete Count Committee, and it does go hand in hand with the diversity inclusion imperative that we all supported. I just had a question, Member Elliott, is there going to be a quota or a set aside that will be discussed by the presenter?
So at this point, we haven't done any type of formal disparity study. So the answer at this point is no. And that's going to be one of the steps that she's going to walk through on that presentation, is the steps that we legally need to go through in order to create those sorts of options for the board to consider.
Thank you.
Thanks. And really, if you wouldn't mind circulating just kind of a reminder email to everybody on the board on this issue, so that we can participate in that.
Certainly, and Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. The second thing I was going to say is at the meeting we're about to have in about half an hour or so, we're going to hear from our former Lieutenant Governor, Evelyn Sanguinetti, who is now, I think her title is the Executive Director of HOPE. And she's going to talk a great deal about fair housing in DuPage County. And I really do view this, and I've told Lieutenant Governor Sanguinetti that I view this as an economic development issue as well. And so Member Rutledge and I have encouraged her to come before the Economic Development Committee and provide a presentation probably in our October meeting on this as well. And so I would like all of the members to get that on their calendars as well, because I do think that the issue of housing in DuPage County for all of our residents is a pretty vitally important economic development issue.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have anything to do? Hearing none.